Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering a build I'm calling the Invincible Ice Knight. Not only is this character nearly immune to taking damage, but whenever an enemy attacks them, one of two things will happen. Either that enemy will get stunned, or they'll take a whole pile of damage and then get stunned. In addition to that, we're also a fully powered spellcaster with access to the very best spells in the entire game. Of course, this character makes an incredibly powerful addition to any party, being invincible and giving you all the utility of a fully featured spellcaster, but it's actually even better for solo play, because when enemies attack us, it's just good for us, and so not having party members to distract the enemies will mean they'll attack you more frequently, which will just lead to their even more rapid downfall. I'm using Gale here as the example character, because this is primarily a wizard build, and he is of course the wizard of the party. But if you're building this as a custom character, I highly recommend using a halfling, because this is an extremely safe character to play, and the ability to reroll ones just doubles down on that and makes it even safer by totally removing one of the possible ways that you can fail by rolling a lot of natural ones in a row. Or a gnome, because one of the only ways this character can lose combats is we're immune to physical damage, so we can lose combats only if enemies land a debilitating saving throw targeting effect on us. Gnome's advantage on mental saving throws vastly reduces the chances of that outcome. So both of those races take an already safe character and make it even more safe to play. Although this is primarily going to be a wizard build, we're actually not going to start as a wizard. We're going to start as a sorcerer, for two particular reasons. One, of course, is that sorcerers get Constitution save proficiency. As a full spellcaster, we will often be concentrating on a spell, so Constitution save proficiency will help us maintain concentration on our spells. And the second is that Sorcerer gives us access to the Draconic Sorcerer, which can allow us to take, as our ancestry, White Dragon Sorcerer. This gives us Armor of Agathys, and this will allow us to deal cold damage back to an enemy whenever they hit us. Because of the items that we're using, whenever we deal cold damage to an enemy, they're going to receive the chilled effect, which means that then when we get them wet, they'll be stunned. Or if they miss us with an attack, they'll receive the chilled effect, which means that whenever we get them wet, they'll be stunned. So whether they hit or miss when we have Armor of Agathys on, they're going to get chilled, and they're going to get stunned. That means that anytime an enemy attacks us, no matter whether they hit or miss the attack, we're going to be able to stun them. We need to know Armor of Agathys for that, and Sorcerer is by far the best way to get it, rather than taking Warlock, because we get con saves, and we get to level our spellcasting as well while doing so. For our cantrip selection here, we are not going to take any combat cantrips, because we are intending to use Wizard as our primary spellcaster, so we're going to be using Intelligence rather than Charisma for our spells. So we're not going to take any offensive cantrips with our Sorcerer levels, since we're going to get those from our Wizard levels instead. For that reason, we're going to pick up Blade Ward, extremely important for this build, because it gives us resistance against physical damage, which doubles the effectiveness of our Armor of Agathys, and will improve our Arcane Ward later on. In addition to that, we're going to take Mage Hand, because Mage Hand can throw bottles of water. Enemies who are chilled, who then receive the wet condition, will be frozen in place and stunned, so the Mage Hand can throw bottles of water at them after we chill them, and cause them to become stunned. So it's a very helpful setup tool for us. In addition to that, of course, we're going to grab Minor Illusion, because Minor Illusion is just very important for every party or solo character to have access to. We can group enemies up for our AoE spells, and so on, and we'll pick up Light just so we have a light source. For our actual spell selection, we're going to take Shield. This character often wants enemies to miss them with attacks. Unlike the normal Abjuration Wizard builds, which just want to get hit all the time, this character is just as happy if enemies miss, and so Shield is even better for us than for other characters, and of course it's already really good for other characters. And we'll just go ahead and pick up Magic Missile, because this doesn't rely on our Charisma and can help us finish off low health enemies and do reliable damage to enemies that might be immune to cold or whatever. For our ability point selection, we're going to make sure that we're maxing out our intelligence and our dexterity. This character is intended for solo play, and I think that you really do not want to have fewer than 16 dexterity for a solo character, because initiative is just that critically important for a solo character. In party play, you could take 16 constitution to have a little bit more in the way of leeway for your hit points, but since this character is mostly intended as a solo character, we definitely want the initiative, especially for the early game, to make sure we can kill enemies before they get to act. So we're going to take 16, 14, 16, and 12 wisdom. Later on, of course, you can potentially replace some of these attributes with the attribute items. Like we could drop our constitution and pick up the gloves of the amulet of health to get 23 constitution, for example, in Act 3. But for the early game, this is going to see you through the best. Our skills here mostly don't matter. This character is not intended to be a party face, so just pick up whatever skills you want for flavor, since we're going to have very low charisma. And other than that, we are ready with our level 1. We've picked up White Dragon Sorcerer Ancestry for Armor of Agathis, and have a great pile of utility cantrips and excellent spells, so we're ready to move on to the next level. At character level 2, we are immediately leaving Sorcerer and taking a level of Cleric. There's a number of reasons for this. Cleric gives us a ton of stuff that's awesome for this build. The first of these things is heavy armor and shield proficiency. Heavy armor gives us a damage reduction that combines well with our existing damage reduction, and lets us use some of the more awesome armor sets in the game to really power up our character. And shield proficiency, of course, is very, very useful in the early game. We do have another item in mind for our offhand weapon slot in the very late game, but shield proficiency will be extremely helpful throughout Acts 1 and 2, just to make sure that our character is taking even less damage than we would be otherwise. To get this, we're going to take Tempest Cleric, because this gives us heavy armor and shield proficiency, also martial weapon proficiency, which isn't incredibly helpful, but is pretty, allows us to use like a longbow in the early game, which is reasonably relevant, and there's a couple of martial weapons that we can consider using at various points in the game. We also get very good spells in Fog Cloud, which is a no-save blind, and Thunder Wave, which can push enemies away from us if we get into a bad situation, and Wrath of the Storm, which lets us do retaliation lightning damage whenever an enemy hits us. Enemies who are near this character will often be wet, taking double lightning damage, and we want to get hit anyways, so this increases the amount of damage we do on a retaliation strike dramatically by adding in Wrath of the Storm, so this character gets just even more damage when enemies actually manage to hit us, which they often won't. For our cantrip selection at this level, of course, we get to take Resistance and Guidance, which helps us with a bunch of the possible, which of course helps us with skill checks and a bunch of the events that require us to make saving throws with Resistance. And then for our last cantrip selection here, we can just go ahead and pick up Thaumaturgy. Maybe there's some dialogue checks that you want to pass, and you can go ahead and use Thaumaturgy to give you advantage on intimidation checks. There are some that are worth passing, even if you aren't spec'd into dialogue, so Thaumaturgy is useful in those situations. In addition to that, our prepared spells, of course, we're going to go with Sanctuary, an incredibly important panic button that we can cast as a bonus action and prevent enemies from doing stuff to us. Remember, you can always cast your spells and then finish your turn with the bonus action Sanctuary and then break it at the start of your next turn, effectively forcing enemies to pass their turn because they won't be able to target you. So Sanctuary gives you opportunities to leave combats and also lets you just win combats without being retaliated against, and create water for a very reliable source of wet that will be super helpful because we intend to be chilling enemies, and then we can freeze them by getting them wet with Create Water. That's it for our Cleric level, so let's move on to level 3. At character level 3, we're going to immediately leave Cleric and go into Wizard. Now that we've gotten our 2 dip classes, we want to pick up our Wizard level. This sets our save DC for items and illithid powers to intelligence, of course, so now we can use scrolls, items, and illithid powers using our high intelligence, and of course is going to let us learn wizard spells from scrolls. So now that we're level 3, we're going to be able to learn second level wizard spells, because we're a level 3 spellcaster, and get access to some of the more powerful combat spells in the game, like Cloud of Daggers and Flaming Sphere. We also get to take our combat cantrips, so we're going to pick up Firebolt, Ray of Frost, and Bone Chill. You can learn some of these from scrolls, but these are the ones that we really need to have, so you can mix and match these if you want to collect even more cantrips, but these are the most important ones. Ray of Frost is going to be our usual combat cantrip, because this, of course, is a cold-themed build, but Bone Chill can prevent enemy healing and give disadvantage to undead attack rolls, so it's useful in some encounters. And Firebolt is very useful for a couple of reasons. One is that sometimes you just want to set a fire, but two is that when an enemy is chilled, which we're going to inflict very frequently, if they receive the wet condition, they become frozen and stunned immediately. One way to produce the wet condition is by creating a cloud of steam. So if an enemy is in a puddle of water and you hit it with a firebolt, it flashes into a cloud of steam, immediately getting everything in that cloud wet and freezing them, stunning them instantly. So this is another way to apply stun, and also another way to, of course, just light fires on explosive barrels and stuff like that if you need to for specific encounters. For our spell selection, the most important spells to have here are going to be Chromatic Orb. Of course, we want Long Strider and Enhanced Leap. These ritual spells increase our mobility dramatically. And Grease. Find Familiar is extremely useful, especially for solo play, because it lets us scout if we need to. And then Ice Knife is another great way to create an ice surface, does a little more damage than Chromatic Orb, so is an awesome spell to have, especially because we already have Shield and Magic Missile known from our Sorcerer levels. Our prepared spells at this level, ignore the higher level spells, of course, we don't know those yet. These are just ones that Gale has learned from scrolls in this playthrough. Our prepared spells at this level are going to be something like, let's say, Chromatic Orb, Grease, Long Strider, and Enhanced Leap. Of course, you can get Long Strider from a Camp Caster if you're using Camp Casters. So you could replace Long Strider with, like, Find Familiar or something along those lines in order to give yourself a little bit more utility in the early game. And then, of course, you're going to have some more prepared spells that are level 2, whatever you've learned from scrolls, most likely things like Cloud of Daggers and Misty Step, which I'll talk about as we continue to level up. Alright, that's level 3. Let's go to level 4. Character level 4. We're going to pick our Wizard subclass, and of course the subclass we're using for this character is Abjuration Wizard. This gives us Arcane Ward, so whenever we cast an Abjuration spell, we gain stacks of Arcane Ward equal to the level of the spell, up to double our Wizard level at maximum, so 4 at this level. And whenever we take an attack, it's reduced by that amount of damage, and then our Arcane Ward ticks down by 1. So an enemy who would normally hit us for 10 damage at this level will only hit us for 6. If we're resistant to the incoming damage, through Blade Ward for example, that enemy will only hit us for 1, and then they'll take Armor of Agathis damage in return, and they will take Tempest Cleric damage in return as well, so we'll deal a bunch of damage. Enemies who miss us currently won't receive the chilled condition yet, but that'll happen later on. And so for now, these enemies are going to be taking a bunch of return damage, and we're going to be vastly reducing incoming damage. This is when the build starts to really come online. If you're doing this solo, you may want to use one of the routes through Act 1 that gets you to level 4 without much fighting, or play a different character up until this point. But this is when the character starts to really decrease incoming damage and deal massive outgoing retaliation damage, and becomes very, very difficult for enemies to kill over the next couple levels. Our spell selection at this level, just pick up whatever you haven't found a scroll for, it doesn't really matter, and then we're going to move on to level 3, or to level 5, level 3 Wizard. This gets us level 3 spells, which we can now learn from scrolls, which of course are the most powerful types of spells in the game. Ones that are really important to look out for this character are Hypnotic Pattern to lock down big groups of enemies, and Sleet Storm to create gigantic ice surfaces. This character's all ice themed, so Sleet Storm is especially useful for us. Of course, you can use Fireball to like kill the Goblin Camp, for example, that kind of thing, but those two are the ones that really matter the most. You will likely be using Potions of Speed rather than the haste spell itself in order to be hasted, so you don't necessarily need haste as a spell. At this level, of course, we have already been learning level 2 spells from scrolls, so we're going to be picking up whatever we want at this point, but things like Cloud of Daggers and Flaming Sphere are the most important spells. If you're solo, also darkness is really, really important. Even if you can't see through darkness yourself, it makes you immune to enemy ranged attacks and gives you a fortress out of which you can fight. So you can, against ranged enemies, hide in clouds of darkness, or force enemies to leave the clouds of darkness if you can cast it on the enemy. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. Very important for solo play, if that's what you're doing with this character. At character level 6, we get to take our 4th level of Wizard and get access to our first feat. There's actually 2 choices as to what feat we take here, but for solo play, I'm going to recommend that you take Alert. This feat's basically invaluable for solo play. You have to go before enemies when you are alone, and the encounters that surprise you, the story events that inflict surprise, can be deadly, of course, to a solo character, so running through the game without Alert, I think, is just too dangerous on a solo character. For party play, of course, you can take just an ability improvement to your intelligence. For this character, I'm going to showcase taking Alert, and then you'll want to boost your spell save DC using items that increase your save DC. It's relatively easy to get a few points of boost to it. This character also mostly doesn't care that much about its spell save DCs. You will focus on making enemies make a lot of saving throws, so they're bound to fail one eventually, and on just doing damage based on enemies hitting or missing you with attacks, which doesn't rely on your save DCs at all. So we can make sure that we go first in combat to either lock down important enemies or position ourselves in such a way that enemies will not be able to hit us. An alternative option to these two is actually Heavy Armor Master. Since we're going to be using heavy armor, this decreases our incoming damage even further on top of the Arcane Ward and helps protect our Arcane Ward stacks and protect our Armor of Agathys stacks. Both of those are great options, so if you have a lot of initiative gear, you can use Heavy Armor Master instead for even more damage reduction. For our cantrip selection at this level, we are going to go ahead and just pick up Acid Splash to open boxes more easily. It saves you some clicks opening boxes. Basically nothing else here actually helps our characters, so that's the only one that we are particularly interested in picking up, is just for some utility. And our spell selection, of course, we're going to fill out with just whatever spells we haven't yet found from scrolls. Remember, at this point, we're a 6th level spellcaster, so we've had access to 3rd level wizard spells from scrolls for a very long time. None of the level 2 spells are particularly important, but Arcane Lock can save you some clicks out of combat for building stacks of Arcane Ward, if that's something that you want to do. At Wizard level 5, we get access to 4th level wizard spells, and the most important 4th level spells are the summoning spells, the Conjure Elemental spells, and Fire Shield. Fire Shield gives you even more retaliation damage with cold damage and can be used to give you resistance to fire, which is also very, very useful in some encounters. And we also get to select a spell, which you cannot learn from a scroll, which is critically important for any character, any party, but especially for solo characters, Counterspell. Counterspell just lets you say no to the most dangerous thing that an enemy is doing, and there are no scrolls of Counterspell available in the game, so you have to learn it by selecting it when leveling up. Getting to 5th level Wizard lets us do that. The most important 3rd level spells to have available are things like Sleet Storm and Glyph of Warding, which is going to be your main combat spell. This is an Abjuration spell, so it builds builds Arcane Ward stacks every time you cast it. It also can be ice damage, in order to be doubled by the wet condition and inflict the chilled condition using the Morning Frost staff that is our main weapon. It's also worth picking up protection from energy, though you'll probably use this from scrolls rather than actually casting it, because we really want to have damage resistance to relevant damage types in encounters to maintain our Arcane Ward stacks as best as possible. So these are the most important, but those are some others that are worth mentioning. At level 8, we get our 6th level of Wizard and get Projected Ward, which of course only really matters if you're playing in a party, though you can use this to save summons if you're playing solo, but it lets you save your allies for party play, which of course is very, very valuable, and then we'll pick up 2 spells, whichever ones we haven't managed to find from scrolls yet. And at Wizard level 7, we get access to 5th level spells, including Conjure Elemental rather than Conjure Minor Elementals. This is, of course, an incredible upgrade for our ability to survive day-to-day, survive throughout the day, because we have now the more powerful summons, and the water elemental can get enemies wet and synergizes extremely well with what we're doing. Later on, the water myrmidon or the air myrmidon will be incredibly powerful for us as well, so conjure elemental is extremely useful. The most useful spells for us at this level, if we haven't managed to find those yet, are conjure minor elementals. Very, very helpful to have additional bodies on the field for solo play. Fire Shield, because that gives us even more retaliation damage. Ice Storm. Again, these are ones we'll already have learned a couple levels earlier from Scrolls, but Ice Storm's another way to create a gigantic ice surface, which can help with enemies. Resilient Sphere is very helpful for solo play as well, because you can use it to just, like, cause an enemy to waste a turn, basically, by encasing yourself in it. And then you can dispel it at the end of your turn if you have, like, relevant bonus actions or they're taking damage over time. And Banishment can buy you some turns, though it's much less useful in solo play than in party play, but still very, very useful. Confusion's actually much better in solo play as well, because enemies are more likely to attack each other when there are fewer of your party on the field. At character level 10, we get our 8th level of Wizard and get to pick up our 2nd feat. And our feat for this level is going to be Dual Wielder. This lets us wield 2 staffs, but it also lets us wield a staff in our main hand, which in this case is going to be Morning Frost, and another weapon in our offhand, which is going to be Cold Snap. The Cold Snap weapon gives us extra armor class, and whenever an enemy misses us with an attack, they receive chilled. So now when we deal cold damage, they get chilled from the Morning Frost. If they miss us with an attack, the Cold Snap chills them. So whether they hit or miss, they're going to get chilled, and they're going to get frozen. It also gives us +1 armor class, so we have the same bonus to armor class that we would have if we were using a shield, if we use Cold Snap with Dual Wielder. For our spell selection, at this level, of course, we're just going to continue to learn 5th level spells and anything that we haven't learned from Scrolls earlier. And then we're going to level to level 11, where we can learn 6th level spells from Scrolls. This also gives us now 18 maximum points of Arcane Ward for a massive amount of damage reduction. Very, very hard for enemies at this point in the game to actually bring us down through physical damage. Important 5th level spells that we might want to pick up if we haven't managed to find a scroll of them. Of course, Conjure Elemental is incredibly important. Hold Monster can be useful in some cases. And Cone of Cold is cold damage, which is what our character does, so it can deal a bunch of cold damage all at once. Those are really useful options. Cloud Kill also is pretty good for some encounters if you can lock enemies down into it. Finally, at character level 12, we're going to take our 10th level of Wizard. You can also go back and respec into a 2nd level of Sorcerer, because that can get you meta magic, which lets you drink potions to refill your spell slots. So if you don't like resting all the time, a 2nd level of Sorcerer can be used to abuse the elixirs that let you refill spell slots. You can then turn those spell slots into sorcery points, which you can turn back into spells. So you can just constantly chug the short rest elixirs for more sorcery points, which is a totally reasonable option. But a 10th level of Wizard, if you are resting more frequently, is the way to go, because it, of course, gets us up to our 20 points of Arcane Ward, which is the way that this character avoids taking damage. We also get improved Abjuration, which helps improve our longevity itself by giving us Arcane Ward stacks whenever we take a short rest. So either way, you're going to improve the longevity of your character at level 12, but this way we just increase our maximum damage reduction, which I think is even better. Of course, for our cantrip selection at this level, we're going to pick up True Strike to annoy people in the YouTube comments, because it works every single time. And for our spell selection, we're going to go back and grab any spells that we haven't picked up from Scrolls. Level 6 spells, the most important ones, are Globe of Invulnerability, which of course can just win encounters on its own by making you completely immune to damage. If your already extant damage immunity is being overwhelmed, Globe of Invulnerability will solve that. And the upcasted version of Conjure Elementals is probably the one that's going to happen most often for the Water Myrmidon or Air Myrmidon, because those are incredibly valuable in higher level play when you can use the wet effect that the Water Myrmidon does to stun chilled enemies. So all of those are extremely useful, and of course, 6th level spell slots are very, very valuable, and of course our main use of 6th level spells is going to be to upcast Armor of Agathis to 6th level for 30 return damage, or 60 against wet or chilled enemies. So just grab whatever you want that you haven't managed to find from a scroll, but those are the most important spells. Alright, that is the Invincible Ice Knight, but of course, we want to itemize this character in order to make it more powerful, so let's go ahead and do that. For items for this character, there are 2 weapons that are really important for how the build plays out. The first of these is the Morning Frost Staff. You get this in Act 1, and it enhances everything that we're trying to do. Firstly, whenever we deal cold damage, we deal 1 additional cold damage. That doesn't sound like much, but it's cold damage, so it will frequently be doubled against wet or chilled enemies, and we're doing a lot of cold damage, so even 1 extra damage doubled to 2 adds up when you're doing as much cold damage as this character is doing. Secondly, whenever we deal cold damage with a spell, we possibly inflict chilled upon the target. Enemies have to make a saving throw or become chilled. Chilled makes them vulnerable to cold damage, which of course doubles the damage they're taking from a lot of our effects. And also, whenever they become wet after getting chilled, they get frozen and become stunned. That means that we are constantly passing out chilled, because when an enemy hits us, they take Armor of Agathis damage, which is spell damage, so that's going to chill them, and then you can hit them with a Create Water or a Thrown Water Bottle or something along those lines in order to instantly freeze them and stun them. It'll break concentration. Some enemies will unfreeze at the beginning of their turns, depending on the exact turn order. This can happen sometimes, where the freeze duration will tick down at the start of their turn and they'll unfreeze, but often enemies will stay frozen for their entire turn. So we're passing out consistent stuns because of Morning Frost. The second of these weapons is the Cold Snap Dagger. Now, it increases our armor class, so we still have decent armor class despite dual wielding. We have base AC of 20 with just like a normal 18 AC heavy armor. But whenever an enemy misses us with an attack, which again, they'll do pretty frequently because our armor class will be good with heavy armor, with the shield spell, we're going to be boosting our armor class in other ways with more items, they also have to make a DC 13 con save or become chilled. So whether an enemy hits us or misses us, they're going to get chilled and then they're going to get stunned. So every single turn, we're going to be dealing a ton of damage and stunning every enemy that attacks us. In solo play, that's going to be every enemy, and even in group play, that should be a lot with good positioning and appropriate party members who can stay out of trouble. Also, don't forget that the Cold Snap Dagger is just an offhand weapon. It gives you a bonus action attack. It attacks using your dexterity, so it's not going to hit that often, but sometimes you don't have a better bonus action. You can just stab someone for a little bit of cold damage, and that's pretty good in and of itself. So this core combination means that whenever enemies hit us, they get chilled and then stunned. Whenever they miss us, they get chilled and then stunned. They really have no good options. In addition to those 2 weapons, we're going to want a good suit of heavy armor that adds more damage reduction. The more damage reduction we have, the better off we are against enemy attacks, and the more our arcane ward stacks will, like the further our arcane ward stacks will go. In the early game, the Adamantine Splint is one of the best ways to do this. In the later game, you might want the Armor of Persistence to give you permanent blade ward and stuff like that. But anything that reduces incoming damage reduction. In addition, it's very important to have critical hit immunity, whether you get that from the Adamantine Splint armor or the helmet that gives you critical hit immunity. If you're using a different set of armor, because one of the only ways enemies can break through this character's incredible damage reduction is if they get a critical hit. Doubling the damage against you is really dangerous when you're relying on flat damage reduction, because that can bleed through to your actual hit points. The reeling benefit of the Adamantine Splint is also really good, because that makes enemies even less likely to hit you. When they first miss you, they get reeling, which we want them to miss. And then they miss more often, and then we chill them even more often. So all of these things are an incredibly synergistic package. In addition to that, we want items that increase our spell save DC, because of course we are a spellcaster, so the higher our save DC, the better. Any item that increases our save DC is valuable, and of course items like the Fistbreaker Helm that increase our initiative are never bad for solo play either. And items that increase our armor and saving throws, such as the Cloak of Protection, are also super helpful for this character. The The higher our armor class, the more often enemies miss us with attacks, and the more often they get chilled, the more often we proc reeling. So again, we're very happy if enemies hit us, we're very happy if enemies miss us, but if they miss, then it hasn't cost us any resources, so might as well increase our armor class to as high a value as possible with items that increase our AC. The Gloves of Dexterity can make us better at actually attacking with our Cold Snap, but also give us more initiative, more AC in the early game, depending on the order that you do things in as well. But this is just a really solid set of gloves. Or you can just use anything that increases your spell save DC, like the Helldusk gloves. The Warped Headband of Intellect is also a good alternative helmet. Notice that we only have 16 intelligence at base, so you can just use the Warped Headband of Intellect to get 17 and then get those points back to put into Wisdom or Constitution, any other stat, in order to get higher saving throws and a few more hit points, so that's another alternative option. And Giant Strength Elixirs are actually pretty useful for this character because our weapon attacks aren't bad. Just bonking someone with the Morning Frost and the Cold Snap does a decent amount of damage because it's all cold damage, which gets doubled by all of the effects. In addition to that, the Snowburst Ring creates an ice surface whenever we deal cold damage to an enemy, which can cause them to fall prone. And of course, we're dealing cold damage constantly, so the Snowburst Ring is excellent. But of course, you want to pair that with one of the pairs of boots, like the Disintegrating Nightwalkers, that prevents you from falling over, because a lot of the time this Snowburst Ring ice will be created right under you, because it's from a melee enemy hitting you with Armor of Agathis. And you need to be able to be immune to prone, or you're going to knock yourself over. So that's a great combination. Also, just one cool trick with this character. One way to get an enemy wet, which of course stuns them if they have the chilled condition, is to create a cloud of steam. If you're creating a lot of ice surfaces with the Snowburst Ring, then if you place a wall of fire down on an ice surface, it melts the ice and instantly turns it into steam, because it does 2 instances of fire damage. Normally when you hit ice with fire, it just turns into water, but a wall of fire will instantly turn it into steam in a single action. So an enemy who's chilled and on an ice surface, if you hit them with a wall of fire, that steam will get them wet and freeze them. They'll then unfreeze, because they're taking fire damage from the wall of fire, but that can like interrupt enemy concentration, freeze them for a little bit. I've also seen the game bug out completely and just never unfreeze them. They just get permanent duration freeze if they are both frozen and unfrozen by the same thing happening. So that's certainly a bug, of course, but may give you some cheesy wins in certain encounters. So Wall of Fire is a very useful spell for setting up the freeze condition on this character. Alright, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this look at the Invincible Ice Knight. I think this character is super fun to play, both for solo play and party play, because it's just really funny when enemies have no good options. Either they hit you and get stunned, or they miss you and get stunned. And I think that that's just really awesome. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 builds and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.